Well, welcome, my friends, to another edition of More Bad News, brought to you, as always, by Camel Cigarettes. Take the Camels Challenge, smoke Camels for 30 days, and see for yourself what a difference Camels can make in your smoking pleasure. And remember, when more doctors smoked Camels, America was the greatest nation on the face of the earth, richer than any empire had ever been. So if you want to make America great again, smoke Camels. Take the Camels Challenge. If not for your own sake, do it for your country. Tobacco made America great. It's now time for us to make tobacco great again. That's my slogan, make tobacco great again. Well, last week I didn't really have a chance to put together a show. Karen and I went out for a 30-mile bike ride on Sunday morning. And I loved the ride, but I came back and I was just exhausted for the rest of the day. We did that yesterday. We went out for a 34-mile ride, and pretty much that was the end of the day for me. But fortunately, I'm feeling much better today. Um, it's been a week of very bad news here on the home front. Our dishwasher malfunctioned, and now we have a mold problem in the kitchen. And on Friday, we had an adjuster here with our contractor, and I can't describe how distressing it is to know that the pending mold survey, after the pending mold survey is done, will begin the demolition in the kitchen. This is my beautiful kitchen, and I can only hope that it's going to be done carefully. We trust the contractor. And by the way, I have a top-of-the-line Kenmore dishwasher recently repaired that I'm anxious to part with if you're interested. So last week also brought us an onslaught of bad news, fires burning again in Canada on schedule throughout Canada, and the smoke is wafting across the Midwest. My air quality monitor tells me that the CO2 particulate counts are very high, and I should open a window. But opening the window was the cause for the problem. Um, so it's better now. Thank goodness it cleared up. But obviously this is only temporary. And the bad news is that we are at the beginning of the La Nina effect, which is going to make all of our climate warming instability worse in the coming years. The last couple of years, there's been a mitigating factor, and that mitigating factor is over. Now it's going to just be aggravating. So when I remember when I was born in 1947, carbon dioxide levels were about the same as they had been for about 400,000 years, around 300 parts per million. In 1950, when I was 3 years old, the world was emitting about 6 billion tons of CO2 a year, almost all of it coming from the US and Europe. By 1990, this had quadrupled to about 22 billion tons of emissions, and emissions have continued to rise steadily. We're now at 37 billion tons each year, and there is absolutely no sign that we are reversing course. Yisker. For the past 2 weeks, I've been trying to record my brother's memoir, a letter to my father, and I was hoping to be able to complete it today, but I need to say a few things in way of context. Yisker, the memorial service for family and communities, recited 4 times a year on Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Passover, and Shavuot. So 2 weeks ago was the most recent Yisker service, and I recorded my brother's memoir, A Letter to My Father, but I really couldn't get through it, and I realized that I could not release it without some kind of context. He wrote this and gave it to me in 2007, and then he died in 2010, and he did not give me this very painful memoir for me to be the only witness to his suffering. So I feel an obligation to bear witness for him. I grew up in a dysfunctional family, and 2 of my brothers were broken by abuse. Their lives were extremely painful, and they died before reaching the age of 60. My older brother, Marty, was incapable of articulating or witnessing to his own abuse. Jeff, on the other hand, had a keen memory for detail and the ability to bring back memories that I had long suppressed. Innocent things like our backyard, which he describes beautifully. In Psalm 147, we read, "Praiseworthy is he who will clutch and dash your infants against the rock." Biblical literature is filled with stories of child abuse, but the most significant of them of all is the binding of Isaac by Abraham. Abraham's immediate and unquestioning consent to God's command to sacrifice his son. It's just a chapter earlier in the Bible. Abraham was arguing with God, challenging God's judgment. After all, what if there are 50 righteous men, or even just 10 righteous men? Can the judge of the universe destroy the righteous with the wicked? But here, where his own son is asked to be sacrificed, he makes no objection. He rises early the next morning and calls his son to come with him to the mountain that the Lord will show them to make an offering. What follows is just a few hundred words, and yet it becomes one of the most enigmatic stories in the entire biblical corpus, and endless amounts of philosophical and theological and literary pieces have been written about it. So I mentioned that my son, my only son, the son that I love with all of my heart, is named Isaac. And I chose the name because I felt like Abraham, that I was bringing a child into the world who would inevitably be called to the mountain to be offered as a sacrifice. And that more often than not, there was no angel to stay the hand and save the child. That throughout Jewish history, the Holocaust is the greatest example of it. Jewish children being brought up and offered to God, and no one staying the hand. And I brought this child into the world knowing that the Nazis were still out there and still gunning for the Jews. My first wife, Helen, refused to bring a child into the world. I have known other women who have made a similar decision. At any rate, my son forgives me for the pain that I have caused him and seems to be enjoying life and supporting himself as an independent contractor. And the first thing I did when I had trouble with my kitchen was to call my son, Isaac, and he found the contractor, negotiated. Afterwards, Karen said, you signed the contract. Did you read it? And I said, no. And Isaac said, oh, no, I read it. So thank goodness he was there. So I want to first introduce the topic with this book, Slaughter of the Innocents. It's a study of the Battered Child Phenomenon by David Bacon in 1971, an extraordinary book. David Bacon was a professor of psychiatry at the University of Toronto and a classically trained Talmud scholar with a command of traditional texts and also a Freudian scholar. So he starts off by making it clear that child abuse is nearly universal, and he speculates that it may have an evolutionary driver. If you can only feed two and you have three, it makes sense to peck the runt to death. It happens all the time in nature. Nature is cruel. So battered children tend to die young, often in infancy, and even if they live, they rarely reproduce. So neither of my battered brothers made it to the age of 60, and only Jeff was able to marry long enough to have a child, but he was never able to sustain and maintain the marriage. So the first point I want to make is based on the notion that everything that you thought you knew for certain is completely wrong. The fundamental premise of the show, with regard to child abuse, most of us think that it's an aberration. It's not an aberration. The majority of the children in the world experience abuse. Children who grow up in loving families and have been provided adequate care are rare. It has now become an open secret that people torture. This is Bacon. Bacon writes in his book, it has now become an open secret that people torture and kill their own children or children in their charge. Why has the secret been revealed now? He says the answer lies in technology. The X-ray has provided objective evidence of child abuse to supplement the testimony, because you look at these fractures in the bones, and a child has a dozen fractures over time, and you can see that these fractures indicate successive instances of trauma that accident can hardly explain. So you're confronted with the evidence. So I believe that my brother wished me to share his testimony, and that's what I'm going to do now. Letter to my father, everything I wanted to say, but I never had a chance. Dear Harry, when I was born on December 19th, 1953, you anxiously awaited at the hospital to find out that your wife had another baby boy. I guess you were a little disappointed when you found out that I was not a healthy little boy. As a matter of fact, I was a difficult baby and rather sickly for the first 6 months of my life. Life in the Stirrup Avenue household would never be the same. I know from conversations that I had with Marty that you were not attentive to me at all. As a matter of fact, you were a downright prick. You tended to take out your frustrations out on Mom and a few of us boys. You enjoyed torturing Marty the most. About a year and a half later, the family moved to the new house just a block over. 15 Silo Lane was our new home until 1959. The house was a small Levitt house, which was located on a small hill. It was one of the developments that Arthur Levitt built, who he made houses affordable to returning World War II veterans. The year after we moved into that house, Lee was born, and now the family was complete. There were 8 people living together: Marty, Eddie, Barry, Peter, myself, Lee, you, and Mom. It was life on Silo Lane when I started to recall what things were really like in our home. I was just about a year old when I started to remember what went on. There were some fond memories. I used to love the milk when the milkman came in the morning and delivered the fresh milk and cheese. My favorite, though, was the Dugan man. He was the one who delivered fresh bread and cakes. You were nice enough to see that we had lots of treats in the form of cakes and cookies. When you would leave in the morning, I remember feeling a sense of calm. It was probably because I knew that for several hours I wouldn't have to listen to that hoarse voice barking constant commands. During the day, we would play with the kids in the neighborhood. Our next door neighbor, who was an Irish cop, was probably one of the closest to us. There was also the family that lived on the corner of Gardner's Avenue and Silo Lane, who would have us over for hours at a time. Bill, the father, was a fisherman, and he would go out on Saturday mornings, and we would watch him clean the fish that he caught at Jones Beach. That was a lot of fun. Harry, most of the fond memories I have of my childhood were those times spent somewhere outside the home. Most of the things I remember from my childhood about you were the way you disciplined. You showed no mercy. You started hitting me when I was about a year old, and when I was 3 years old, the hitting stopped and the beatings began. I know that Marty probably suffered the most from what I now call the Harry Mehler abuse cocktail. You were great at dishing out physical abuse and an expert at emotional abuse. I'm 53 years old now, and I am still working on getting well. I wonder if I ever will. You managed to convince your brother Phil and cousin Harry Winter to loan you enough money in 1959 to buy a house in Hicksville, New York. 70 Blueberry Lane became the new Mailer house. This house afforded luxuries that we had never known before. We had 2 bathrooms, which cut down on the bathroom accidents almost completely. We had 5 bedrooms, although you chose to make one into an office. We had a gigantic kitchen where Mom could cook up a storm. We had a garage with space all the way to the back. We had closet space galore. And finally, we had neighbors who we could spend time with more easily. There was Saul and Edith Ferdschneider, with their kids, Harvey, Eleanor, and Mark. Harvey became Barry's friend, and Mark became mine. There were the Oberwaugers, who lived a couple of doors down from the Ferdschneiders. The older daughter, who we didn't really associate with. Mrs. Oberwager was a very eccentric woman. She babysat for us a few times, but beyond that, we didn't associate or socialize with them at all. Behind our house lived a family called the Farties. They were very sweet, and you tormented them on a regular basis. Their daughter was so nice to Lee and I. She was always playing red light, green light with us, and she was playing with the other kids in the neighborhood as well. And then there were the Kretschmers. That was a strange family. 2 of the boys had criminal raps, and the younger one, Lee, was my friend. They had a vicious dog named Shadrach, who we all stayed away from. What I liked the most about the house was the backyard. It was big with a concrete patio. There was an apple tree and several lavender bushes along the back fence, which Mom loved. Mom loved opening up all the windows in the back in the springtime to let the smell of the lilacs run through the house. By that time, Marty had become a sort of outcast. He was the black sheep of the family, who was constantly berated by you and Mom. He did not live in the house regularly, but he would come home and fall asleep in front of the television or on the big couch under the beveled mirror with a gold leaf. Wherever he slept, Mom would scream at him and yell and calling him a pig and a no good for nothing bum. When I was 11, you found out that I was smoking and you slapped me so hard you knocked me to the floor. When I hit the floor, you started kicking me. You kicked me for something like hours. I don't know exactly how long, but you kicked me with that funky shoe of yours and it caused some damage. I was urinating blood for 3 days. One day, my gym teacher noticed that my underwear was soaked with blood. When he asked about it, I told him that I got my penis caught in the zipper. He didn't believe me, but he let it go. And after that, he paid special attention to me. As a matter of fact, he periodically asked me if my father was beating me. I pleaded with him not to say anything because if he did, it would only make the beatings worse. I was more mellow than most of my brothers, and you saw that as a sign of weakness. You would always remind me of what a coward I was, and that I would amount to nothing, and I would be a low-life cab driver or truck driver like Marty. We managed to make it through the years with bumps and bruises and a few broken bones. You made me bleed more times than I want to think. Your exploits with women outside of the home made me want to vomit. One day when I caught you on the couch in your office with our maid, you threatened to kill me if I said anything. There were so many things that you did that disgusted me, especially the way you pushed Mom's family away. There came a time when you told Mom that her brother and family were not welcome in the house. Although your brother and your family were welcome, her family was treated like lepers. Finally, the one thing that you did that really troubled me was that at 12 years old, I was forced to ride the Long Island Railroad to go to school in Kew Gardens. When I told you that I was being attacked and beaten regularly on the way back to the BMT train at the end of the school day, you told me to stop being a coward and to fight back. There was a lot of pain and suffering through my life. You didn't do much to protect me. You didn't do much to make me feel safe. You didn't do anything to make me want to live. So now at 53 years of age, I find myself trying to deal with the deep-rooted scars that I have. And sometimes they hurt more than the physical crap that I have to go through now. I know that we're supposed to forgive and let go. I just haven't been able to do that. Maybe one day. For now, though, I wanted to write you this letter and tell you that I wish that things could have been different. I wish that there's been someone to protect me.